Hi, welcome to Commvault Connections. My name's Nigel Tozer from Commvault, and I'm going to take you through a data journey. Okay, so let's begin the actual presentation today. And we're going to do that by taking a little look at where we're going to go today during this session. So we're going to look at securing your data. Well, actually, we're going to do a short section on kind of the state of data today, just to kind of set the scene. And then we're going to look at securing your data, particularly from things like ransomware, cyber attacks, and those kind of things where you have to look at cyber recovery. Then we're going to take a little look at, what you can do with cloud data in terms of data protection. During the pandemic, there's been a big shift to using the cloud, and there's more changes in that area. So we're going to dig into that somewhat. Then we're going to take a look at some information about understanding your data with Commvault's Activate solution stack. Then we're going to talk about data resilience, what you can do to ensure that your organization is always data ready. And then we're going to take a look at simplifying your data infrastructure. It's quite a short session at the end, but I do believe there's other sessions today that you can dip into that will explain some more about those things too. So let's begin by looking at where we are with data today. And we know you live in multiple worlds. So when you start to look at the passage of time and the different kinds of technologies you have to keep using, keep adopting, and balance them all just to keep agile, keep your organization competitive. Now, we've got this situation, as you just mentioned, where data and workloads are moving from on-premises to the cloud and potentially back again. There's not a lot of that going on, but it does happen. And there's technologies around now that's helping us to manage all of that, Commvault being one, of course. Now, we've seen a lot of virtual workloads being containerized now to leverage cloud native capabilities. And that's a really interesting one. People think, or some people think anyway, that containers are very focused on the cloud, but there's a lot of tools to enable you to run a core on premises and then shift some into the cloud, and they're very transportable. So you can move them back and forwards as you need to. Pretty resilient technology too, and super lightweight to keep those well on premises and cloud costs down. Then we've got this, notion that workloads really are everywhere, and you're going to have to change. So all of these things look reasonable today. Where we'll be in a few years' time, who knows? But you can guarantee there'll be some new technologies, new things going on that you'll need to support. And I can guarantee that it's all going to rely on data. You look at the things that are going on now with the likes of 5G, IoT, smart cities, driverless vehicles, driverless everything, to be honest, or autonomous vehicles. And all of this requires a ton of data. Even if you're not in that space, there's other things going on with artificial intelligence and machine learning. It's getting smarter all the time and actually becoming not just a nice to have. It's one of those things that's absolutely going to be critical in the future. The trouble with all of this stuff, though, is it does create what we describe as multi-generational data sprawl. You've got data everywhere these days. You're probably going to have some workloads that you might think of as legacy or heritage workloads. I've heard them described as, and you need to keep those running. You can't just switch them off. So they stay there, and then you'll move to new business models, and that will change the technologies that you use there. But you need to effectively manage all of this if you want to allow your organization to keep up with the market and technology changes. And you've got this long tail and this aggressive new adoption of stuff, and it's complicated. And like I said, data is literally everywhere. And if we're honest with ourselves, we don't generally do a good job of managing it. IT maybe doesn't think it's got the right to take control of some of this data. It just looks after it for the business or the organization. And on the flip side, you've got this, the business itself, the people like you and I, we just create data and we don't typically manage it as well as we could because it's a manual task. So you can't really do any of this stuff manually either. It makes for a pretty complicated world where data is concerned. Now, when you start to look at the data sprawl, your environment might not be today where you want it to be, right? So we've got multiple data silos down here at the bottom. You've got on-premises, cloud, you've got remote sites, and you've got a ton of different technologies, a mixture of infrastructure and applications, file data. All of these things can silo you into working in specific ways just because of the very nature of how they operate themselves. Now, all of these data silos across your environment introduce risk to the business, and they really can compromise the opportunity and your ability to grow. Now, there's some specific risk areas that I want to highlight. The first one is this notion of data fragmentation and failure points. Because managing data sprawl introduces inefficiencies, it also introduces greater risk of data loss, and it can be more difficult to recover. And we see this with Commvault. A lot of customers and our partners find environments that are have tons of different point products, and that's another area of fragmentation too, just to deal with things like backup and recovery. The next thing is really around this problem we've got of this ever increasing attack surface. Now, data silos, the lack of consistent policies across them can introduce a greater risk of a data breach or data leakage. And if you get hit with ransomware, because data environments are so complex, you might actually not have everything protected. And of course, you can have insider threats where unauthorized access to data can compromise your organization too. Now, one of the things, big problems, it's not just this risk of cyber attack or ransomware. There's a lot of regulation now, and society demands a greater degree of transparency about what's going on, particularly if you're a public body. But even if you're a public company, you have to do a lot of things from a compliance perspective, just to prove that you're not breaking any laws or mistreating people. And the expectation with regard to compliance and privacy regulations, such as GDPR, CCPA, it doesn't matter where you are in the world, there's something similar to that that's cropping up. They've never been so high. And actually, the distributed workforce that we have now with working from home, especially in highly regulated industries like finance, healthcare, and other sectors, are all difficult things to control. So that's problematic too, and it can be costly, not just from risk perspective of fines or legal action, which we're going to look at a little bit later on, but also from just manage it can be expensive in its own right. And if you don't manage it, then you've got the expense of all the infrastructure storage and all the other things that you need to do too. The next thing really is this inability to scale and innovate with the market. So when you start to look at all those things across the bottom, new technology comes along, the business wants to go in a new direction. You don't throw something off that list at the bottom, you add something to it. And that's where, then things like your data protection, all the other things that we've already discussed fold into that. And it can make you less agile, and actually make the adoption of new technologies potentially more complicated than it should be. And then you tend to get things like DevOps living in separate silos, if that's what you've just brought in, to generate some new growth or to innovate your business or organization. Then the next thing we have to consider is the lack of process and a lack of efficiency and a lack of automation. Not only managing all of this data sprawl that you've got requires and impacts your IT team and its productivity, it does lead to higher storage and resource costs as well. And again, it can result in a loss of data availability. So these are all quite critical issues. Now, what we refer to this as is the business integrity gap. Because if you don't fix or deal with these issues, you know, where you are today, the red line at the bottom, and where you need to be to help your business grow at the top is just going to become too complicated to achieve. It's going to be too expensive potentially to achieve, and it's littered with, you know, really serious risks along the way. Not just data loss from the complex environment, but like I said before, you know, finding yourself in the media. You know, if you've got great ideas and you can't get them to market, then again, your competitors are going to beat you, and that's a business risk too. So all of these things are linked back to data and digital transformation. You know, when you boil it down to things that every business is trying to do right now, isn't just about new business models. It's also about efficiency, and there's a big efficiency gap in this space too. So what does Commvault do about all these things? And we try and meet these challenges head on with what we refer to as intelligent data services. It's built on the Commvault platform, and we really want to close that business integrity gap and enable organizations to execute on a digital transformation strategy and genuinely accelerate business growth. Or if you're public sector, you know, deliver on the goal of meeting better services or adding more services at the same or lower cost. So, you know, whether you're public sector or commercial, the same kind of needs are there with this integrity gap and fixing it. And the first thing we look at really is this notion of data management and protection. So what we're trying to do is address the issue of data fragmentation and the failure points that you can have within there. And that allows you to manage data across the industry's broadest ecosystem. So all those things you see at the bottom, Commvault plugs into that and more, and they're not a complete list. So you know that anything new that you bring in, even if it's containers and DevOps methodologies that you want to use, you know, Commvault can help you with your Kubernetes and so on. So being able to, at the core, protect the business effectively is really, really important. The next area is of data security. Now, you're probably saying, Commvault, you're not a security company, but actually, everything that we do has really strong areas, strong security model built into it. We don't bolt stuff on after it. Commvault, I've been with the company for 14 and a half years, and from the day one that I've worked for this company, we've taken security super seriously. And that means that what we're doing now can really help you to not just, you know, recover after a ransomware attack or a cyber attack, but protect the backup systems. We're going to touch on this a little bit later on. I've got one of my colleagues, Don Foster, is going to speak to you about this. But and there's also tools within Commvault's Armory that can actually help you shrink down that attack surface. It can let you know whether your data is properly protected or not. It can reduce the amount of data that you have to recover. And all these things can be really important in your data recovery and security posture. So if you know CISOs out there, this is a really good story for them. They're going to be really interested. Talk to your own CISO, or if you're a reseller, you know, feel free to engage with them too. The next thing we're going to look at is this issue of data governance and compliance. Now, Commvault has you know, some really good tools that can help with the likes of GDPR and any other regulations that you need to adhere to. And if, as a business, you want to expand into new markets that have different kinds of regulations, these tools are so flexible that they can help you deal with all of those. Now, you know, everything from data minimization, which is a GDPR principle, to right to be forgotten, to right to erasure. That's the same thing, obviously. But you know, DSARs that ask for, you know, what data do you hold on me? All of those things, it can be really difficult to deal with, and you know, you need things like chains of custody and so on to deal with, you know, for your legal and compliance teams to work with. And again, there's a bunch of tools within Commvault that aren't IT tools, they're business, legal, and compliance tools for those teams to use and provide some really effective workflows that can lower costs as well as you know, deliver on those needs. The next area really is you know, this notion of data transformation. So if if you need to shift or repurpose data around your environment for application modernization to deal with DevOps, and for increased data access, and connectivity between different parts of the business or business leaders, then again, we've got some software-defined storage technologies that can really help power that from on-premises into the cloud and keep all of that working in a really slick and efficient way for you. And finally, the data insights addresses this lack of automation and process efficiency. And we do this by applying data use patterns and machine learning, data-driven insights to actually enable operational efficiency and run your IT for you from a backup, recovery, availability, governance perspective, so that all of these things can be as automated as we can make them in a really smart way that reduces complexity. Now, when you bring all of these things together, what you actually get is a different kind of environment. So if we start at the bottom and just look there now, we've got the industry's broadest workload coverage, as I mentioned before. But what it does is it means you don't have to worry so much about the details. You just think about the applications or VMs or containers, and they'll fold into protection policies or availability policies or data management policies. And then things like secondary storage becomes just that, and it becomes much more efficient. So, and that can include our own software-defined storage integrated appliance, of course. Now, what we start to think about on top of that is this intelligent data services platform that I've just talked about. And the Commvault portfolio then is offered through this really flexible delivery model. So it's a software that you can download and run on premises. It's bundled into an integrated appliance, or if the hardware isn't something that you particularly want, or you need something specific for your environment, there's a reference design, so you can simply build your own appliance that will actually work with our prepackaged appliances if you want to put those in place. You can run it managed by one of our many partners. So I'm sure there's some partners on the sessions today that actually provide these kind of services. And of course, you can do it as a SaaS subscription. Some of you might have seen the metallic logo knocking around, and that's a Commvault venture. So it might look like it's something separate, but it actually folds into the same management tools. And that brings me to the final piece here. So we've got a single interface and API-based workflow tools that offer customers and partners like you on the call today all of a unified experience, regardless of which delivery model you choose for these technologies, and regardless of the environment, because as I said before, we work in this really broad ecosystem. And by the way, these APIs might sound potentially more complicated, but they're really not. There's some really nice workflow tools that you can use, which will help you build and automate a lot of services and processes in your environment. So when you start to look at the competitors that we have out there, the ones across the top are what we refer to niche vendors. So they specialize in certain areas. They don't provide full coverage for that broad ecosystem. They're very focused, but they're also simple to use generally. But you have this limited user experience, and you might need to bolt on third-party tools to get you to where you need to be. Or you might find yourself using a mixture of the ones at the top and the legacy vendors or established vendors at the bottom. Now, the established vendors typically have broader ecosystem coverage, at least they've been around longer, but they've either got hardware agendas or limited coverage for their own what they see as competitors, or even organizations like Veeam. They'll scream simplicity to you, but you've got 6, 8, 10 products depending on what you need to do with them. Then Commvault sits in the middle, and we have this intelligent data services platform that delivers a broader set of services than a multiple combination of all of these competitors from a single interface, single point of control. And we do that with more functionality, not just backup availability and disaster recovery, but also the compliance, governance, software-defined storage, And on top of that, it's all delivered in a way that's super flexible. So you can choose whether it's a backup as a service from Metallic, or mix and match it with Commvault, which can be software or appliance, you name it, and all of that again works from one single interface. Even though Metallic's run separately from the Commvault software side of things, they do integrate, and like I said, you've got that single point of control. Ultimately, that delivers a really good unified customer experience. So none of the niche stuff. And as we've stressed already, it does cover that broadest workload coverage out there at the moment. Okay, so what we're going to do now is shift gear a little bit and go a bit more specialized and drill down into some specific areas. And the first one of these is we're going to take a look at securing your data with Commvault. Now, one of the challenges that we have today is that there's probably more different types of threats than we've seen. Some new ones have come along. Ransomware has been a big deal since sort of 2017, though of course it was around before that. New complex ways of working, multi-hybrid cloud environments add to complexity. So there's different areas of potential failure that come in there. But when we start to look at things like infrastructure in the cloud, as we move from servers, which we would treat as pampered pets, in our data centers, to this notion of them being cattle in the cloud, big herds of things. So if one falls over and dies, we don't really care anymore. We've also shifted to that same methodology on premises as well now in a lot of circumstances. But the trouble is, I think availability isn't foolproof. Replication doesn't protect your data, only the service. So things like corruptions and human error, they're replicated along with everything else. Mistakes replicated too. And it certainly doesn't protect you from network outages such as DNS. And anybody who's seen one of the big cloud providers go out, it's always DNS, right? So, so we have to be aware of those kind of things. Then we've also got this issue around employee error. It's the main way for hackers to get onto your network, as well as other issues like misconfiguration, accidental deletion, or failure to follow processes, or even willfully ignoring processes. We still see DBAs creating what they refer to as their own backup copy of a database and putting it onto some storage maybe where it's not as secure, which then could potentially give you a massive problem if you are subject to a data breach. And then of course, natural disasters, they're not so common, well, especially in Europe, but they do happen. We still get fires and floods, and obviously there was the recent disaster at OVH in France, which is a prime example. They didn't have backups offsite, and there was actually a lot of data that was destroyed. And of course, I didn't mention it, but leakware is another issue. So, and this is something that you really have to consider now, especially with the ransomware. The bad actors are actually looking to target backup systems. They'll already remove, in some circumstances, SQL snapshots from disks. So that's one way. If you can't get your data back, then you're more likely to pay the ransom. And of course, the other thing that they're doing is this leakware, where they're siphoning off data over a period of time, and then they'll show you that and say, we're going to leak your data. I mean, technically under GDPR, that's already a data breach, so you already have to deal with that. But that aside, all of these problems have not gone away. And the thing that we always say is, especially in the cloud, every cloud provider will have your data, your responsibility written into their cloud contracts. So even if you use the cloud, you still have to back up and recover. And also, the tick box backup maybe that you'll see for some of the cloud systems, whether it's SaaS or infrastructure as a service, it's not always going to deliver the efficiency that you want. And it's actually another opportunity for the cloud provider to make some additional revenue, overdoing it for yourselves. Now, all of this means that backup and DR has to be both effective and secure. Ransomware in particular doesn't want any system in place to stop the ransom being paid, as I just mentioned, and backup and disaster recovery actually do that. So, but they can be taken down as well unless you take the right precautions. Now, we're not saying for a moment that you scale back on your security stance. It has to be defense in depth. You have to have multiple layers, which is what you're going to hear now. But backup does become disaster recovery, for that matter, does become your last line of defense. So with that, I'm going to hand over now to Don Foster. This is a recorded video, but it's not a long one. It's relatively short, and I'm sure you'll agree it's valuable, and it can be found online if you want to see it too. Over to Don.
Organizations everywhere are all struggling with a similar problem. We're all facing multi-generational data sprawl. See, as businesses are transforming, as we're all innovating, modernizing our environments, meeting our own market and customer demands, we're finding workloads being created not only in the data center, but also at the edge, and also in the cloud, and anywhere in between. And the one common topic that continues to come up as customers make this move towards the cloud, towards the edge, towards these modern applications is security. How do I ensure that my environments are secured, my data is protected, and that I can respond appropriately if I get struck by a threat? And remember, a threat just isn't ransomware. It could also be a hacker, a bad actor. It could be a good person making a mistake. And so security has definitely risen to the top of everyone's minds on how can we further lock down our environments, ensure our data is safe and secure, but also make sure that we're still giving the agility back to the business to innovate and change based upon the market demand. At Commvault, we've been working tirelessly to ensure that our customers have a solid ransomware defense strategy. My name's Don Foster. I'm our Global Vice President of Sales Engineering, and today we're going to do a quick double click into our strategy in providing this multi-layered, secure and hardened ransomware defense strategy and how it helps our partners and customers achieve that for their data estate. Now, the easiest way to start thinking about security in general is to use a pretty interesting analogy. So let's take a house analogy, for example. Security of your data estate is much like trying to secure your home. Every home is different, every data center is different, every data landscape is different. But of course, with every good security execution, it all starts then with a plan. Devising the plan to understand where your potential threats are, what those threats are, what your threat landscape looks like, and what you might need to do in order to harden them, secure your house. So that's the first and most important part. Once you have that plan, you can then start to define a perimeter security. This perimeter security will give you the capability to tie in and harden those different weak points. Things like locks on doors or motion detectors, locks on windows, maybe some video cameras to also keep parts of your house constantly under surveillance. When the perimeter security is then put in place, it then becomes very important then to ensure that we can monitor the status of what's occurring within that actual environment. Ensuring that your house is secure should be able to happen no matter where you are. In your home, maybe remote, maybe on vacation. You always want to make sure that your belongings in your household is secure. And so being able to do that from the cloud is a very important capability. Then on top of that then, the ability to respond. What happens if a threat is then coming at your house? Being able to then take that and alarm or call 911, have the police or security then arise. These are all pertinent items that you would require to respond to that threat and then ultimately ensure that once everything has settled down, that you can then return back to the most important part, the normal state. We are once again confident that everything is working appropriately and that your environment is secure to move forward. So leveraging this analogy, we can tie this directly into how we at Commvault also help to secure your data estate by following very similar ideas. Number one for us, which is identifying and identifying the risk assessment of your security and profile across your data environment, ties directly back into our plan. What we at Commvault do from this perspective is we give you an ability to assess the security of your environment, not only within the Commvault environment, but also to do it across your environments that we integrate with, so infrastructures, different authentication platforms, etc. Let's take a quick look at our dashboard that's included with every customer to showcase what this looks like. As we take a look at this security dashboard, you'll see there are a number of things that our customers can leverage to understand what their risk profile looks like. This simple dashboard allows you to go through a number of different components, infrastructures, and third-party items that we integrate with to identify and assess what security controls are turned on and really what effect they have on your entire security posture. More importantly, you can also change them through the same dashboard and apply the right protection and controls and the best practices as you see certain critical or potential warning events happening with your environment. The key thing here is that you get to choose what you want to enable, where, and why, because at the end of the day, it is your environment, and you have the choice to ensure the level of security that you need. The interesting piece here is, of course, it's all managed through a single pane of glass that is also integrated into the way that your data is managed and protected. Now that you've got your security assessment completed with the dashboard, it comes to the next most important part of then defining your security defense strategy, and that is protecting the data estate. Very similar to defining a perimeter defense solution. So with protecting your data, we do a number of things to ensure that your data estate is indeed secure. We start with the ability to have an immutable architecture. What we do here is ensure that there are certain data locks, application locks, that only allow Commvault binaries and processes and authenticated users to ensure that data can be deleted, changed, moved, or modified. It's a very important process that's always happening under the covers to ensure that the proper authentication measures are always occurring. The second piece that we do is basically infrastructure hardening, and that's by following some of the best practices delivered by CIS and other Department of Defense security protocols to ensure that our threat surface area is as reduced as possible. And that's an ongoing process that we continue to do year after year. The third piece is the zero trust authentication. Essentially, we're ensuring that our application is constantly, with the binaries and processes, always authenticating back and forth with one another to ensure that as we're accessing data, changing, doing different controls, etc., that our processes, as well as our users, are exactly who we think they are, and they have the access to actually do what they need to execute against. All three of these together, along with our ability to air gap and provide isolated networks, gives you an incredibly hardened and secure, protected environment for your data state. On the topic of air gaps and network isolation, what we do really interestingly here is we allow you to isolate different storage environments, much like a drawbridge on a castle. When the drawbridge is down, data is flowing. When the drawbridge is up, data can't come in or out. We manage and maintain the infrastructure that it takes to bring that bridge up or down to ensure then that your storage environments are truly isolated, whether that's on premises, in the cloud, or even using our own Metallic cloud storage service to ensure that you have that proper secure air gap space. Then the third most important piece here to our strategy is how you can then monitor the data. That comes back to being able to deliver a level of status and doing it from anywhere. In fact, we leverage great technologies like machine learning to provide that level of data analysis to understand what's occurring within your environment. And we apply that to the idea of honeypots. Think of them as tripwires within your data estate that will trip up a ransomware or malware solution and identify a potential threat that might be active in your environment. Taking those sort of trends together with the active and backup data allows us to provide behavioral and anomaly trends to what might be occurring across the environment. Let's take a quick look at what this looks like within our dashboard. Here you see our behavioral analysis of different trends and different operations that are occurring at the file level. Here you see from this dashboard, we're able to monitor and track exactly what a normal state might look like based upon those different trends, and then start to highlight when unusual file activity or anomalies start to strike. At that point, a user is able to respond, get detailed information about what is actually occurring, and be able to indicate if something is at risk or suspect. At that point, you can recover all the information from that host or from a number of hosts to a pre-selected version or to a version that was pre the actual anomaly, and or you can recover that entire server as a VM, and again, an isolated scenario, so that you can look at the data, validate that it's good, and recover it back when your process is set. All of this is meant to help you monitor, understand the trends, understand the risk, and more importantly, help you start to do the next process. And that next process, of course, is your ability to respond. Responding is just like calling the police, sounding the alarm, whatever it might be from the home security perspective. In our ability to respond, as you just saw from the dashboard from our machine learning and behavioral analysis, we give you the ability to restore very quickly, prior to the anomaly, prior to the event that might have occurred, doing it back in place, out of place, or even taking the entire machine as a virtual machine so that you can look at it in its own isolated space. From there, we give you the ability to automate the validation of the applications and the different components in the data that you've recovered. The last piece is one that we haven't quite touched on yet, and that's the ability for you to surgically remove threats then from your protected and active data environment. This is called our ability to do threat removal. So if you have been struck by a ransomware attack, if you've got files within your own backup repository, within your archives, within your live data sets, we're able to go and actually action against that and remove those threats so that you don't have to worry about the threat reinfecting your systems again in the future. And finally then, probably the most important process within the whole entire ransomware defense strategy is the ability to recover. Recover and get back to a confident, normal state where everything again is green and active and running the way you would expect it to. Commvault does a number of things for our customers with this ransomware defense strategy. Number one, we ensure that your Commvault solution is made highly available so that if you were struck by ransomware, if your CommServe or your solution went offline, that we can actually make that metadata highly available somewhere else in a different location, in the cloud, in another data center, so that you can instantly fail over and still proceed with those data recovery operations. We also give our customers the ability to send that meta information to our own Commvault cloud so that you can have multiple points of time directly with our own support personnel so that we can help you at the instance that you get struck by ransomware. It's been a very helpful feature and something that has saved a number of customers that have somehow allowed for the ransomware attacks to get within their perimeters. On top of that, using Commvault Complete and our disaster recovery solutions, we give our customers the ability to recover anywhere, at any point in time, with whatever SLA they deem necessary, so that you can be confident that you have the ability to return back to that normal state and continue to have a secure and high integrity data management platform. So these are the core steps to how we deliver upon our ransomware defense strategy. It's multi-layered, it's hardened, it's immutable, it gives you the ability to respond, and it gives you the ability to monitor what's occurring across your environment at all times. We have a really prescriptive way for customers to do this. It's all about identifying your different security assessments and then being able to act upon that so that you're locking down the environment, providing secure copies, and then ultimately you have the ability to then action, monitor, respond, and recover if you get struck by ransomware. To find out more, please join us at www.commvault.com. Also, follow me on Twitter and in LinkedIn, dfoster_jr and Don Foster at Commvault. Thank you so much.
Okay, I hope you enjoyed that session from Don Foster there on how Commvault can protect you from ransomware. Clearly, it's a huge topic now, and if you can recover your data quickly and easily, and your business too, then obviously you can avoid paying the ransom and getting into trouble in that respect. So now we're going to shift gear a little bit, and we're going to look at powering your business into the cloud. Now, one of the things that's escaped nobody in the last year is the quick move to the cloud. So you think about, the number of organizations that are working from home. As you can see there, this apologies, this says US employees, but I'm sure there's a similar percentage of Europeans also working from home. It's caused organizations to have to pivot, look at if they didn't have a cloud first strategy, adopting one. And of course, even the enterprises that had a cloud strategy have maybe had to accelerate their change or find different ways to leverage it. And one thing you'll notice here is the metallic logo and the purple coloring. That's because this section looks very much from the perspective of Metallic, which is a Commvault venture, which is SaaS delivered backup and recovery. So there's no doubt that folks are going quickly to the cloud or are already there and optimizing it. And a cloud strategy does bring new challenges. Depending on how you've adopted the cloud, it could lead to more data sprawl or data silos. Edge data is something that's critical for a lot of organizations, not just having it all in the data center or in the cloud. So that can be a challenge. We've already heard about ransomware, so I'm not going to talk too much about that, but clearly backup and recovery is your last line of defense there. I know we've already said that, but it truly is. And it's just as important to protect, endpoints as it is your on-premises or cloud data. All of those potentially vulnerable. There's also this increased liability. So if you tick the checkbox on the cloud service provider to say, please back up my data, then you still got an element of limited liability from the cloud provider. So choosing your own solution that can back up the data wherever it all is, including endpoints and SaaS applications, is clearly something that's pretty attractive. And of course, this hybrid support. Most organizations are still hybrid rather than completely in the cloud. Though, of course, with Metallic, it doesn't really matter. But the point is, whatever your strategy, whether you're mostly on premises or a little bit of cloud, across that spectrum, all the way to the other way, even if you are completely cloud organization, then Metallic can provide that protection for you. So if you're going to be successful with your move to a hybrid model, then you require a cloud-first approach everywhere. And that includes backup and recovery. Now, Metallic is, as I said, a Commvault venture, and it's what we refer to as BaaS, backup as a service, or it is a SaaS. So it's completely delivered. There's no infrastructure that you have to be concerned about. You can just point it at the data that you want to protect, and away you go. So you can meet the SLAs and retention and recovery requirements. The storage is all built in. So you just tell it how long you want to retain things, and that's dealt with for you. As we've already pointed out, it mitigates the risk of ransomware and cyber threats. Because it's based on cloud technology, we actually run it inside Azure. Technically, it can run anywhere, but we do use Azure. It can dynamically scale. So you can just, if you took on and bought a new business, literally you can fold that straight in without having to worry about how you fit it into your existing systems. And because it's simple to use, literally you can get it deployed in literally minutes. Now, one of the big things that's attractive to a lot of organizations is the fact that, it's pay as you, because it's SaaS, it's pay as you go. You remove all of the capital. There's no hardware or infrastructure for you to consider at all. And actually, we get really good rates. So the storage costs are really, really cost effective anyway, even without the backup service itself. And there's some tools that work pretty with endpoints and with things like Office 365 to provide you with some of the e-discovery and regulatory controls that you're going to need, especially with all that working from home that we mentioned earlier. And this is really, Metallic is the solution from Commvault to achieve all of these things. So it'll protect not just on premises and cloud data, but also SaaS like Office 365 and Salesforce.com. So both of those you can fold into the protection regime. But again, regardless of where your data is, whether it's files or object storage, whether it's some sort of database that supports an application, or whether it's VMs and even Kubernetes, all of those things can be protected. And of course, we don't have to forget endpoints either, particularly in this work from home world that we're all in now. So most organizations don't know what data they have or some of the risk levels associated to it. Now, that might sound like a really big claim, but unfortunately, we find this to be true. And there's a good reason for that. If you look at just 2016, all of the data in the world in just 2016 added up to just 1 zettabyte. That's an unimaginable amount of data to me. I don't know about you, but now, in 2020, well, it's around over 2021, we're not 20 far away from 2020, we got up to 59 zettabytes. So in just 4 years, we've ballooned by 59x. Where are we going to be in the next 4 years? You think about 5G, smart cities, all the other data collection opportunities that we've got, IoT, autonomous vehicles, drones. It's just going to go crazy. So we've got a lot of data. Next thing you got to consider is this notion that incredibly 55% of organizations' data is actually dark. That means it's unquantified. There's some risk element to it. If you don't know what it is, you don't know the risk associated with it, whether it's sensitive or not, and you can't exploit that data either. So it's going to remain untapped, but still be a charge on your organization. Now, these things are huge things to deal with. And then when you consider that if you don't know what 55% of your data is, and you've got more data than you did, maybe you followed the zettabyte numbers and you're 59 times bigger than you were in 2016. I don't know. But if that data is then breached and it puts people at risk, then what's going to happen is one of two things. You're going to make the headlines, which is always bad. You're going to potentially get hit with a GDPR fine. You're also potentially going to get hit with a lawsuit. And it can be really scary. Now, one of the things most people think about the regulation, but actually it can be the legal cases that are worse. There's one airline in the UK, EasyJet, and they were hit with a data breach, and now they're going through a class action lawsuit that could see them paying well over 100 million euros in compensation, because they actually stored the 3-digit code on the back of the credit card and the credit card information. So that's a material risk to them. So if it gets really bad like that, then you're in a bad place. Now, I know I just said that the regulations like GDPR are less of a thing to worry about than maybe legal action, but if there are probably more ways for you to breach the data protection regulation. So it could be, for example, that you do get data breached and you hit with a regulator fine, but you could also fail to deal with DSARs or right to be forgotten. Those kind of things can also drop you in it. You could be collecting data that you don't know that you're collecting because you haven't followed a process that could also cause issues for you. And one of the scary things about this, and it's just recently the 3rd anniversary of GDPR coming into place, and fines are now ramping up by an average of 40% year over year. And the frequency of fines is up by nearly 20%, according to DLA Piper. So, and that's just the GDPR. If you start to look further afield, everybody thinks maybe the next one along is the California Consumer Privacy Act, or CCPA, if you happen to operate in California. But there's another one called the LGPD in Brazil. There's other similar ones in Australia, Japan, South Korea, India, South Africa, Canada, Chile, New Zealand, you name it. So if you're thinking about moving into new areas or new regulatory fields, then having a better handle on your data is something that you absolutely have to do, particularly if you are going to grow it that 59 times that we just talked about. Now, I didn't show this earlier, but this is a kind of little map of the Commvault product stack. And so far, we've looked at Metallic SaaS, and we've looked at a bit about how Hyperscale X and Commvault Backup and Recovery and Disaster Recovery can protect you from ransomware. But now we're going to dig into the 3 across the top there, which is file storage optimization, Commvault data governance, and e-discovery and compliance. And these are going to help you with the 3 integrity gap issues at the top. So believe it or not, they can help with data management and protection. You can reduce the amount of data, you can recover quicker, you can find out what data is protected, you can find out where sensitive data is to stop it from being breached or from some sort of insider threat. And of course, you can protect yourself from risks from regulators and legal sources. So we're going to look at for each of these, we're going to look at a few interesting stats that are relevant to that particular topic, and then we're going to go into some of the details about the products themselves. Now, this is an amazing number to me. Gartner believe that between 40 and 80% of files in a typical enterprise environment are redundant, outdated, or trivial, which is ROT is short for that, or don't have an assigned owner in the directory service. Now, apologies for reading that out, but this is the kind of stat that you have to really drill into. So up to 80% of your unstructured data could be just junk, yet you're backing it up, you're storing it, you're copying it to the cloud, you're keeping it for regulatory purposes, like you probably retain your backups for 7 years or something like that, for financial ones or whatever. But the point is, you're doing a lot and spending a lot for data that you shouldn't have to. And if it's unassigned in the directory service, that person's left. So there's not really much point keeping it because it's unlikely to change. And this goes back to that 55% of the data being dark. If you knew more about it, you'd be able to do something with it. And when you start to look at the icons over on the right, that means you're paying more for enterprise storage. Legal searches take you longer and are more expensive. Regulation processes are the same deal. They're going to, if you've got to forget somebody and you've got to find their data in more places, that's more of an issue. You've got this large attack surface because there's more data in more places that you don't have a handle on. And then, of course, everything that you do is going to take more time. And we're not looking at clocks here, we're looking at calendars. So, there's a lot of issues around you having more data than you should. Now, some of you who are in IT might say, well, I don't have a mandate from the business to do this. I would say, and throw that back at you and say, what you don't have is the evidence of why you need to do it. Because believe me, if you present it to the business, then they are going to start to understand. The other thing, and this is a data quality issue too. So if you're looking at AI or machine learning programs, you could also be missing out on the kind of data that you need. You're missing out on an opportunity to clean the data, to get good data instead of mediocre data. And what this can really mean for your AI or ML programs is that they either fail or they're less effective, or you're going to build in some sort of bias. So there's a lot of things going on around this that have a cost to them. And don't forget, a terabyte of data on enterprise storage, the enterprise storage is expensive enough, but when you fully load it with backup DR, multiple availability tools, replication, it starts to get really expensive. So it's definitely is a problem that needs to be dealt with. And really, that's where file storage optimization comes in. It's there to improve the storage efficiency and reduce the costs of your data. Right? Primarily, that's what it's there for. So it can find that rot, it can find the unassigned data, and then, if you need to move to the cloud, it could potentially happen 40 to 80% faster. And when it's up in the cloud, it'll cost you 40 to 80% less on your cloud billing. These are really important numbers. If you've got data already in the cloud and you haven't gone through a consolidation exercise, it's not just about, on-premises storage. This product can work in the cloud for you as well and lower those cloud storage costs. Now, from mitigating the impact of ransomware, what this is going to do is if there's data that you shouldn't have on primary storage, it's going to move it somewhere that's lower cost. It's also going to archive it away and lock it away with extra layers of security, which mean that it could potentially be more protected. And if it's leakware, it's going to stop that data from being leaked if it turns out to be sensitive. So, it can help mitigate the impact of ransomware. And of course, if you are hit, then your recovery times are going to be 40 to 80% faster, depending on how much of the rot that you've managed to deal with in other ways. A lot of it, we can just be expired and got rid of anyway. So, something I always point out on these sort of things is from a value perspective, data value can peak and it can trough. You could have some data that's really valuable today, worthless tomorrow. If it's a sensitive data that's in there, the risk is going to remain constant, even potentially years down the line. So it does really need to be dealt with. And of course, that's the next thing about rationalizing access to key data. If you've got sensitive data that shouldn't be kept any longer, then it can't be compromised internally either. Now, the last icon here over on the right, you're going to see on every one of these, because these all work as a single pane of glass control. So if you have more than just file storage optimization out of the suite, then it's the same manager for them all. So, and then you can start to mix and match the features to customize what you're actually delivering. So I'm going to make that point every time. Sorry if that gets a little bit boring for you. So what does it do for customers? Well, this was a financial firm. It's actually an insurance company, quite a large one, a global one. And they wanted to get their data down from 25 petabytes to 10 petabytes. And you know what? The initial analysis showed that we could absolutely do that. So, there's a good amount of data to be dropped. They also like the integration with Commvault Complete, because if you're using Commvault backup technology, it can advise you if data isn't being backed up, and that can again be another protection from ransomware. And they're also really happy with the customization that they could do with this to further extend the value in their organization. So the next thing we're going to look at is data governance. And data breaches are not the only thing that governance is relevant to. Of course, it also comes into regulatory compliance and those kind of things as well. But when you think about more than half of organizations experience a significant cyber attack, and then the average time to contain and know that you've been breached is nearly 2/3 of a year, well, more than 2/3 of a year, then it kind of gets scary, and it makes you wonder how you need to deal with that sensitive data. And of course, if you're doing it manually, then the chances are there's going to be a lot of data that's missed, and also, that's going to increase your risk factor. So when we start to look at what Commvault data governance does, it's kind of interesting. So first of all, it'll streamline that identification of sensitive data or the type of data that you want to deal with. And it does this by using entities. So yes, it develops an index, and you can search by an absolute name, for example. So you can type in my name, Nigel Tozer, and it'll find all the documents that contain that. That's great. There's a lot of things that do that. Where it starts to increase in value, and of course you still do need that for other types of compliance, but where it starts to get into real value is you can have it look for types of things. So if you want to look for driver's license numbers, passport IDs, any of those kind of things, a type of something, then that entity search will help you do that. And then you can start to manage it by the type of data that it is. And if it's got more than one, or you can all be customized, so you can set it up to say, if you've got 3 or 4 of these things in, these are the most sensitive things, and 2 of these which are less sensitive, and then one, you can build up a picture of the risk in a document or data, and that can be really, really valuable. Especially, if you archive that stuff off, you can prevent it from getting leaked by leakware or ransomware, for example. What it also gives you is some tools. So a lot of people in IT get really scared. Oh no, I've got to do a discovery search. Well, once all this is in place and you've got this role-based access, you can give it to the people that need it, and they can do their own searching. They can do their own decision-based collaboration to reduce that risk for your organization. The next thing too is it can help you to meet compliance needs for privacy regulations like GDPR. So again, if you've got to collect all the data for a subject access request, a digital subject access DSAR, then clearly that's important. And then that might turn into a right to erasure, a right to be forgotten request. And again, finding all of that data and then deciding whether you should forget them or not by that particular piece of information. All of those workflows are dealt with. And that means that you can, same tool, because it's so customizable and you can look for different things, it can work in different sectors. So it's absolutely going to work in banking and finance. It can work in, pharma, healthcare, you name it. You can point it at all kinds of different data governance tasks. And of course, you can combine it with the tools that are in file storage optimization or e-discovery and compliance. Now, customer in this case was somebody that was a local government agency. They didn't have the staff that they needed to take care of all of the sensitive data, both from a security perspective and from adherence to regulations like freedom of information requests and other things that public bodies have to deal with. And of course, migrating to Office 365 meant that they had quite a lot of data to move, which thinning that out was obviously kind of important to them. And it did all the things they need. They were able to automate at scale the e-discovery, so delivering fast response times for requested data. They reduced their total cost of ownership because of their migration went much quicker. And of course, they were also able to actively reduce risk by finding sensitive data in insecure locations and dealing with that, which again is kind of important to do. So now the final section for the Activate suite is this one on Commvault e-discovery and compliance. Now I've thrown up some numbers about finance here. If you don't happen to work in finance, you might think, well, you know, why is that important to me? I'm not in a regulated industry, but the truth of the matter is just about every industry these days is regulated in one way, shape or form. So the compliance affects everything that could affect consumers, so food production, pharma, even manufacturing. You know, if you think about some of the things that happened with the defeat devices on the Dieselgate issues, you know, that's a compliance thing too. So, you know, each one of the different areas has specific tasks or needs. And yes, you know, some might not be as costly as others. And you might not need, you know, if you're a greengrocer, you're clearly not going to need the same level of compliance tools as somebody in the finance world, but there's still an issue. So it's up to you to obviously work out what your own risk is. But e-discovery and compliance has a number of really useful beneficial outcomes. So the first thing is this notion of a chain of custody. If you've got to deal with courts or regulators, making sure that the relevant data is unaltered is really quite important, because that's evidence. So you need to be able to prove that the document is the same as the one that's relevant to the case. So this chain of custody is really quite key. Efficient compliance that uses fast and scalable data collection is also pretty important. You need to be able to respond as quickly as possible with, you know, the scalability that you need without, you know, it costing you an absolute bank vault of cash. And this ability to do the search without involving IT, you know, the data custodians themselves over multiple locations in the cloud, on premises, laptops, you name it, wherever it might be, then that collection is really, really important. And this is another area where, you know, you have to automate these things because it's just too much to do manually. You can't deal with that. And then finally, the thing before the single pane of glass point, once again, is that you know, we reuse data from backups and archives if you've got Commvault. Now, I should stress that each one of these products, even this one, doesn't require Commvault backup and recovery to be in place. They all work completely independently, both from each other and from other Commvault solutions. But if you do have a Commvault backup and recovery and using the archive tools in there, you can actually use that as your data repository to work from. And that means that you save on the expense of building a whole new repository just for this particular function. Now, one of the customer stories here, this is a cooperative, so this is owned jointly by the employees and potentially the customers. The idea is that you know, they were suffering from a big increase in the number of systems that they had to protect. Silos of data all over the place, and the storage costs were pretty high, and they were able to do a number of things. So they were able to carry on growing and still be managed by the same amount of staff. Their search and e-discovery in a self-service without involving IT was really beneficial to them. And really, they couldn't believe how fast they could find things and deal with it. You know, legal issues just weren't as expensive as they thought they were going to be. And as you can see, it's always great when a customer says that the solution paid for itself in a matter of minutes. We do like to hear that sort of good feedback. Now, just to make the point really strongly, you know, these are 3 different data services that fit into the broader platform, the solution platform that Commvault has, but they do actually form one unified solution. So if you had 2 of these or 3 of these, then they are going to work like they're one product from the same UX. And indeed, it's just command center. So if you have Commvault backup and recovery, it's going to look really familiar in that respect too. Now, you'll see the name Activate. I think that name is going to be phased out for the suite. I don't know what the new name's going to be yet. But right now, if you want to learn more about these, then if you just type in commvault.com/activate, and it'll take you to a page where it'll give you more information on each one of these individual products. So we've covered off that piece. We're now going to take a little look at dealing with some of the data protection challenges, how to make your business or organization more resilient. So this is really going to focus on backup and recovery from Commvault, and also disaster recovery, which is a separate standalone product, but both of them do work together, as you'll see when I go through this. Now, one of the things that you'll notice here is, there's a bunch of data protection challenges. Whilst the core need hasn't changed, you need to get your data back if it's corrupted, deleted, gone wrong, been attacked, whatever it is. Being unprepared is not good, and we're seeing a generalist approach now in IT, which means that things need to be really easy to use. So if you have something that's difficult or hard, even if your environment's complex, you still want your resilience, your availability tools to be easy. And this is something that's really, really important. If you haven't got a usable backup, if your backup's been corrupted, if the ransomware has been working for so long that all you have is encrypted data in your backups, that's not a good thing. You need to have multiple areas to recover from, and reliable copies. And Commvault, we already discussed how Commvault always checks the backups to make sure that the data is good. But there are other things too. You've got immutable snapshots depending on the infrastructure provider. We can also manage snapshots in the cloud. So there's ways to get multiple copies of data and store it in different locations to make sure that you've always got that reliable copy. Now, when it comes to high cost, clearly, the solutions need to be cost effective. And what we've done at Commvault is we've given our customers and partners as well, obviously, ways that they can access Commvault technology that suit them. So the cost can be managed between, an appliance, or a Commvault appliance, or a cloud service like Metallic, or software, or reference architectures where you can design your own hardware. And the way that we work and give you the ability to use a global repository and make it really efficient with the dedupe, move things off primary storage and get it onto the lower cost storage as quickly as possible, and archiving. All of these things increase that optimized data and make it mobile. So don't forget, just because it's a backup tool, you can also use it to move things around really effectively too. The other thing you need to look at is emerging threats. Now, you heard what Don said earlier about how we can help protect our customers from ransomware. We still don't have a customer that's lost any data to ransomware yet. And that means that having that, not just a secure copy, so you know that you've got a usable backup, but having proactive threat management. So we do it with the honeypot, we do it with AI looking for anomaly detection, and just other ways to make sure that you get warned as quickly as possible. And don't forget, if you're using Commvault to back up endpoints, then that same AI can probably find ransomware at the point of entry, so it's really effective in that way. And then you don't want to be worried about whether your backups are going to be able to be recovered or not. You don't want general uncertainty. Is not a good place. It should never be said about backup and disaster recovery. And that's why we put in a bunch of tools to make not only the backup itself verifiable, but also test the process. And you can automate that testing. You can test out your DI, you can test out recoveries, so that when you don't need them, they work fine. When you do need them, you know that they're absolutely rock solid and reliable. All of these things are really important. And the reason it's important is it's just the cost of data. Now, personally, this isn't one of my slides. I don't generally like to put up values because it can be so variable. But, and all these are kind of interlinked too. So the first one here, you get an outage. What if you didn't protect a linchpin system because you didn't realize it was a linchpin system? And it failed. You don't have the level of SLA applied to that you should, and it has a domino effect and takes down something that's more critical. Or, a more critical service that requires that occasionally tries to use it, and then it doesn't work. So those kind of things, you really have to understand how data travels through your organization. You have to understand the value of protecting it appropriately. And it's not just about the data either. If it's a service that you're protecting, that service could be important, even if there's not a lot of data attached to it. And of course, we mentioned ransomware so many times today, I know, so apologies if it sounds like a stock record. And for those of you who don't know what a stock record is, email me and I'll explain it on another session. But the end result is poor business outcomes. It can lead to a personal impact, even losing your job. You can even affect the stock price of your organization if you're commercial and publicly traded. So these are things to be avoided. Now, one of the things that, this is, I guess, half a dozen things here that Commvault Backup and Recovery can do for you. But the point is, it's going to meet all of the toughest protection challenges. So firstly, it's going to change the way you operate. If you're a smaller business, then the AI is going to help make up for the fact maybe that you don't have specialist staff. If you're a bigger business that's got a hellishly complicated hybrid environment, then literally just small changes to protection policies can leave you working on spreadsheets. And that's not because the backup technologies themselves are complicated. It's because your environment is, and everything you change has a knock-on effect. And this is exactly the kind of problems, low skills or highly complex, things like AI can fix for you. And we built in AI to help you manage those SLAs. You tell us that the SLAs you're going to hit, and we'll configure the backups to make sure they get hit. And you don't have to worry about that. If they can't be, we'll tell you where the bottlenecks are. So maybe you need to make infrastructure changes or, ultimately change how you approach something. But the point is, you've got not only that automated recovery plan and policies that's always up to date for you, but you've got a dashboard and the visibility to keep on monitoring those SLAs. In terms of business needs, clearly, being agile, being fast is really important. And this is something that I think often gets missed with backup technologies. And it's why a lot of organizations end up with multiple point products. They'll want to put a new technology into their environment. They go, oh, our existing backup doesn't work with that. Okay, well, let's put a new backup to work in with the new technology. And that slows you down, creates another silo. It's more expensive. It adds complexity. All of the things that I've talked about so far. So having something like Commvault that has the broadest ecosystem in the business by a country kilometer is really, really important, because it means that you've got the ability to say, we want to go in this direction, we want DevOps, we want Kubernetes, we want that cloud over there, we want this technology over here. You can do all that, and you can be pretty sure that Commvault's going to protect it for you without having to go into third parties. You get those efficiencies that we've talked about in so many different ways. From a resource perspective, there's a lot of efficiencies we don't have, because they're quite technical efficiencies, but the ability to store and move data between different tiers and keeping control of those costs is really, really important. Even the deduped single repository that we use for backup and archive, the way that that's replicated around and shifted and moved, all of that stuff is done really efficiently. So as long as you're meeting the SLAs, you can be sure that you're getting the best possible efficiencies out of all of that. And then, of course, the final point, again, touching on SLAs, we're not top ranked by analysts for no reason. And, even down to the automated dashboards that that you're going to get your data back when you need to. It's all adds to the comfort. And of course, all of that stuff is role-based. So you only need to give the information to a level that somebody needs for themselves. So you don't need to overcomplicate anything. And, whether you're a VM operator, DB admin, application owner, line of business owner, you can get the reports that you need just to make sure that everything is running absolutely tickety-boo. Now, some of this stuff I've covered already. But Commvault Backup and Recovery does a lot of things that that are very desirable to have. So obviously, being able to protect whatever you've got, and this is something I haven't spoken about too much today, but being able to protect multiple types of software as a service. Database as a service is becoming more and more common now. If you look at AWS, Azure, Google, and others, and there's a lot of offerings out there. And Commvault can protect, again, the broadest range of those. Platform as a service can be a massive cost saver. So compared to, just using a chunk of SQL on Azure is about a third of the cost as provisioning a VM and putting SQL on it. So there's some really big cost savings there, as long as you can protect whatever it is that you need to. And of course, endpoints too, don't forget. Then, of course, migration, being able to compress things with deduplication, do VM recoveries and convert them from one type to another, whether that's from on-premises kind of VM or from one cloud to another. That migration can be really powerful, and it's got multiple uses, not just for backup. It could be for permanent migration. It could also be, it could also be for things like dev and test or disaster recovery, because cloud disaster recovery, if you want to work at backup speeds anyway, can be 50% less costly than on premises. But hold that thought on disaster recovery, because I'm going to come to that specifically very shortly. Thinking about snapshots, having the ability to do that revert and have things around it managed too. So, you can have a really complex SAP system. And even if you use a snapshot to protect the core data, when you revert that, there's still a lot of buttons and levers to press that can take many, many hours, but potentially even 4 or 5 to get them all working for you. But Commvault can automate that, orchestrate that recovery, combine snapshots and backups, and get you to a really good place in literally just a matter of minutes. We've seen that sort of difference. So snapshots are really easy to leverage too, which is very important. Obviously, being able to deal with the cloud as if it's your own data center is something that's really important, and Commvault is completely cloud native. So it's going to scale in the cloud as you need it to and give you that overall coverage. So you never have to be concerned that data in the cloud isn't as well protected as data on premises. And then finally, that storage integration, regardless of what data you have and your SLAs. Yes, you can meet all of those, but you can also use all of the different storage targets that you might potentially need, whether it's immutable object storage on premises, immutable storage in the cloud, various different hot and cold options that you might have up there. Being able to make use of low-cost secondary storage on premises, or for even things like tape on-prem or tape in the cloud. All of those things are options with Commvault. Some of our competitors might force you to look at third-party bolt-ons to be able to use to add extra complexity to. We don't do that. So looking next at Commvault disaster recovery in the same sort of way, some of you know Commvault might be aware of. We used to have a product called Orchestrate, and Commvault disaster recovery has been around for well over a year now. But it's orchestration plus much more. So what this enables you to do is do disaster recovery from on-prem to on-prem, or from on-prem to the cloud, or even cloud to cloud. And what it enables you to do is make disaster recovery as easy as possible. And again, it all works from the same user interface as regular Commvault backup and recovery. And in fact, the two of them can work together if you have both, and they both work completely independently. So if you have another third-party backup, if you have another third-party backup product, then you can still add this on top until, of course, you get Commvault in for backup too, which we always recommend. Just joking there. So from orchestration, then we can replicate from physical to virtual between different VM types, from on-premises to the cloud and vice versa. Data mobility is there, so it's all cost optimized, it's deduped, it's made as efficient as possible. We can use collection systems like snapshots too. There's so many ways to configure this to deliver on the SLAs that you need. It's really effective from a security standpoint. All of the security tools that are built into Commvault Backup and Recovery, you can rely on here too. AAA, access authentication, and so on. And from a recoverability, we still got that verifiable data and bunches of different copy management tools to make sure that that's all completely effective. And it's going to deliver on the SLAs that you need. I'm not going to go through each one of these, but this is really just to point out that there's also a bundle where you can get Commvault Backup and Recovery, Disaster Recovery together, and that's known as Commvault Complete Data Protection. As you can see, that's going to deliver that comprehensive coverage. It's cloud native, so this stuff runs natively in the cloud. You don't have to be concerned about what cloud you're using or how it's going to work. It's going to work in exactly the same way. It's going to have that coverage. And of course, the flexibility from an SLA perspective. So recovery point objective, RPO, less than a minute to up to 8 hours. And RTO, recovery time objective, how long it's going to take to get your data back. Again, that can be near 0 to up to 24 hours. So you might be thinking, well, why would I go for the longer time periods? Well, it's just, again, getting it right for the business. The shorter you go, the closer you get to 0, the more the costs go up for a number of reasons. So being able to do it appropriately for the organization, budget and business needs is really quite important. So that's covered resilience. So the last thing we're going to do today, before we finish, and I'd like to thank everybody for staying with me, is looking at simplifying infrastructure. So we're going to go back to our slide that shows you the portfolio again. So these are the intelligent data services that we've been referring to close that business integrity gap. And when you start to look at the bottom layer here, we've got Commvault Distributed Storage, Commvault Hyperscale X, and Metallic Cloud Storage, MCSS. So what do they do? Oh, let's take a look. So Commvault Distributed Storage is a software-defined storage system. Now it can be used for a number of different things. Data sharing around a global organization, for example. We've got people in aerospace that are doing that kind of stuff. Or it can be used for things like containerized applications. And the way that it works is you put it onto converged infrastructure for on-premises. It'll connect to the cloud and you can replicate, shift things around. And what it means is you've got that headroom, the scale out, so you can burst out of your own environment into the cloud as needed and control all that things really, really efficiently. For those that have heard of Commvault before, you might have seen this product referred to as Hedvig. We changed the name earlier this year to Commvault Distributed Storage. So if you know Hedvig, it's the same thing. Now, Commvault Hyperscale is our flagship appliance. So if you think about most organizations now that have gone private cloud, they're looking at hyper-converged infrastructure. And the way to think about Commvault Hyperscale X is that it's hyper-converged infrastructure for backup. So each time you need to add some compute or storage, you can plug in another box. It grows the file system on the back end. And what's changed with Hyperscale X over the last release is now that it's leveraging our Commvault Distributed Storage, software-defined storage. So that is able to intelligently replicate around the backup copies and get them into the right places where you need. And it's really effective for, if you've got systems on the edge or remote sites, you might have something in the data center. And of course, ultimately, while Hyperscale is an appliance, an on-premises appliance, the software side of Commvault is completely integrated. So it just operates as one. So you can run software in the cloud, or you could use Metallic, of course, in the cloud too. And again, those interfaces join up. So it's really, really effective. The efficiencies delivered by the software-defined backend, it's really quite cool. And of course, when you grow the storage, you grow the compute. So, you've got that linear scalability. And unlike previous versions, you didn't have to buy more than one to have specific numbers of blocks. And of course, actually, the one thing about Commvault Hyperscale X, it's also available as a reference design. So if our hardware options don't suit you, you can choose one that fits in with your normal purchasing, and then it becomes some software that you can install on that. You kind of build your own appliance to a reference design. So that's and both of them interlink too. So you can mix and match between reference design and the actual appliances depending on your needs. Very flexible indeed. And finally is the Metallic Cloud Storage Service, MCSS, which is a zero infrastructure option in the cloud. So it uses the same backend that our own Metallic Backup as a Service uses. And you've got the same advantages in terms of cost and the egress charges depending on your environment and use cases. So again, if you need to know more about Metallic Cloud Storage or Metallic itself, then please visit Metallic.io. There is links from Commvault.com as well, of course. So that brings me to the end of the formal presentation. Talked a lot about Commvault. Thank you for staying with me. And I just wanted to finish off because, as they say, self-praise is no praise. And we still do really well with the analysts and keep which makes us top of the industry for many reasons, not just from Gartner. Other analysts are available. If you go to Commvault.com, there's a lot more information here from various places, GigaOM, IDC, Forrester, and so on. The reason I've chosen this one today, and actually this Magic Quadrant is probably due for a refresh around this time of year. So if you're watching this replay after June, you might find that there's an updated one. So go check again the Commvault website. I'm sure it'll be there. But the core thing that I wanted to point out was the Magic Quadrant itself has a lot of research that goes into it. And the research didn't used to get published separately, but now it does, and it's called the Critical Capabilities. And what's interesting about this year's Magic Quadrant is that Commvault came #1 in the 3 categories, and it's the first time a vendor's actually come #1 in all 3. So whether you're concerned about physical environments, maybe legacy, whether you're looking at your virtual environments, or whether you're looking at cloud, public cloud, and cloud native, the choices there from Commvault fantastic and do put us, like I said, in that top spot. So with that, I'll close down this presentation, say thank you all for checking us out. Please do follow us on whatever social media channels you like. You can find Commvault on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, of course, and probably some others that I haven't considered just yet. So enjoy the rest of the day, and thanks again for watching.